Mysterious Realities. Case File 11. The Case of the South Shield Poltergeist and the Gateshead Grey. Within the paranormal world, the poltergeist is, without doubt, the most frightening and misunderstood phenomena. Poltergeist comes from combining the German words, Polten meaning crash and Geist meaning spirit or ghost. Many use the translation to be noisy ghost, and although they are less common than the traditional hauntings, poltergeist activity has been reported for centuries. Many reports from individual people and entire families claimed that they became besieged by an angry spirit taking out its vengeance upon them. In the English northeastern coastal town of South Shields, situated in South Tyneside, a young family reported themselves to being under attack by an angry and mysterious force. What they experienced in December 2005 is believed to be the most severe poltergeist case reported in the United Kingdom. The case would go on to become known as the South Shields poltergeist. The young family, which included a 3-year-old boy, had lived in the house with no activity whatsoever. However, one December evening the activity started from nowhere. To start with, they would experience the occasional door opening and closing on its own. As well as this, they also reported chairs started to move on their own. Being of sound mind, they dismissed this activity, instead thinking it was associated to the house settling, or a breeze coming through the windows. However, all this changed on Christmas night, as activity in the house significantly changed for the worse. After an exhausting day, the young couple lay on their bed reflecting on the happy day the young family had enjoyed when the door to their bedroom slowly opened. Initially, they put this down, as usual, to the settling of the house, until that was, one of their son's stuffed toys appeared from nowhere in the doorway. Then suddenly, the toy launched itself across the room, striking the woman fully in the face. As they lay there, trying to make sense of what had happened, the bedding on their bed started to move, as if an invisible hand was pulling them off the bed. The couple tried to pull the bedding back over them as they took part in a tug-of-war against this unseen force. As quickly as the encounter had started, it ended abruptly and painfully. The woman looked on in horror as her husband let out a loud cry of pain and complained about an unbearable burning pain running down his entire back. In fear and panic, his wife pulled up his shirt to inspect his back. Immediately terror gripped her and her heart began to beat heavily, as she looked upon 13 deep and angry red scratches that burned like fire to such an extent she could feel the heat coming from her husband's back. As terrifying as this was, it would soon become clear that this was only the beginning of their encounters with an unseen force that would soon take over their once quiet family home. If they thought their initial encounter with their phantom attacker was a single event, their invisible invader wasted no time in showing this was just the start and that things would rapidly progress to terrifying levels. Even more frighteningly, was that the activity would continuing using their child's toys in the events to come. Two of the standout incidents involving their son's toys would terrify them to the core. One day after cleaning the entire house, they sat down for a well-deserved rest. After a few minutes the wife got up to go and put some last things away. Walking into a room where the door had been closed since they finished cleaning, she froze with fear as she discovered a rocking horse which had been hung by its neck from a ceiling fan. The next day, they decided that they needed time away from their home, so they went out of the day and enjoyed a peaceful and uneventful family outing. However, upon their return, their blood turned cold as looking down from the top of the stairs at them was a stuffed rabbit clutching a Stanley knife. These two instances caused this young couple to feel physically threatened and were scared of their own home. They had no idea whether or not this thing, whatever it was, could cause them physical harm and, as you would expect, were terrified of anything happening to their son. They wouldn't have long to wait for the next phase of the activity, as threats of bodily harm would come from an unanticipated source as they both started to receive threatening messages on their mobile phones. Bizarrely, the couple, but mainly targeted towards the woman, started to receive disturbing texts which included "you're dead or die bitch." More frighteningly, the couple could not trace these messages back to any phone. Whilst this is clearly troubling, the sending of these messages could have been completely unrelated to the outgoing reported activity and purely down to someone who had an axe to grind. What happened next, however, would cause this young family to reach out for help. In a plot arguably right out of a horror movie, the entity horrifically turned its attention to their young son, first by disturbing him whilst he slept, building up to actually hiding him in strange places within the house. In despair, and believing there was no end to their trouble, they contacted local paranormal investigators Darren Ritson and Mike Hollowell. Ritson would go on to report that normally, when paranormal investigators are called in, the activity may reduce or, in some cases, stop altogether. However, with this case, the activity continued and the force at work in this house was quick and eager to show itself to Ritson and Hollowell. During their investigations, Ritson and Hollowell witnessed objects balancing at gravity-defying angles, threatening messages appearing on paper as well as an etch-a-sketch. They would report that activity in the house appeared to be out of control, psychic energy on the loose but with an intelligence behind the phenomena. Ritson and Holloway reported that on several occasions, they actually caught a glimpse of a large black shadow in the house. They added that it was black as night and they felt that the energy it gave off was of pure evil. However, and unfortunately, the investigators failed to catch the entity in film. Then, as suddenly as it began, the poltergeist activity abruptly stopped. Despite the ending of their ordeal, the young family decided to sell their house and move as far away from it as they could. The new owners of the house have reported no paranormal activity, leading many to view the South Shields poltergeist skeptically, and that the family made the story up to cash in on their made-up ordeal. However, Ritson and Hollowell fully defend the family, and that claimed that everything that was reported was true, detailing the events in their book entitled, The South Shields Poltergeist, One Family's Fight Against an Invisible Intruder. The Gateshead Grey. In 1940, whilst Britain was in the mists of World War II, 5-year-old Robert Hall had an experience that still haunts him to this day. Hall, who lived with his parents, sisters Rhoda and Cynthia at 29 Headley Street in Bensham, a suburb of Gateshead close to the River Tyne and the city of Newcastle. Hall's brother Harry was serving on the front line. As a child, Hall says that he was often left to look after himself. He would keep himself entertained by playing in the streets and back lanes around his home, as well as regularly travelling to Newcastle on his own using the tram. He described himself as an adventurous and curious young boy who had no time for school. On the day in question, Hall and friends, as many others were, had been watching soldiers marching along the Bensham Street Saltwell Road. After watching the seemingly never-ending lines of marching soldiers, they soon got bored. Hall and a friend were feeling hungry, so they decided to run down the back lane towards their houses, so they could raid the cupboards, when they came across what Hall would describe as a barrier that seemed to distort their view. Turning the corner into a back lane near Hall's home, they were shocked to discover an egg-shaped UFO situated behind an invisible barrier that slowed down their movement. Managing to pass through, Hall claims that they came across what he described as horrible creatures that appeared to be happy with the bear. Hall stated that there were between 16 to 19 of these creatures, describing one as Bigfoot-like, being very tall, a number of grey figures that were small, ranging from around 4 foot to 2 foot. A further was described to be wearing what Hall would describe as an old-fashioned diver's mask, and one he said was a tall, very good-looking human-type male, blonde hair with a robe around his shoulders. Daryl Sims, an alien abduction researcher, has since confirmed the general appearances of aliens from abductions include small grey figures, a Bigfoot-style creature and a human-like entity. Hall claims that he and his friend were then abducted and taken on board the craft and examined by the horrible creatures. They were taken on board the UFO, which Hall said had moved as it was first at the bottom of the back lane and then moved nearer to the boys. Hall states that he was taken into the craft and subjected to an examination, and a blood sample taken from his neck. Once the creatures that finished, he was taken back outside, where he noticed there were others playing around the area, including girls who became hysterical and were trying everything they could to get over the fence towards the railway to get away. Hall claimed that there was also a large black dog that was going wild. Hall pulled something from one of the creature's belt. He then pointed it at the dog and states that it became docile, like it was drugged. Hall believed that the creatures had been using this on the children if they did not comply with instructions given. Hall managed to break away and ran up Headley Street towards the soldiers. He reported the strange creatures and his experiences to the first soldier he met. However, they didn't believe him, saying that it was just children playing games. Hall claims he showed the soldier a mark on his face that he had sustained during the event. The soldier then followed Hall. Turning the corner, the soldier was shocked at what he saw and fired his pistol towards the creatures. Everything then went wild. The UFO suddenly disappeared into the sky. Hall remembered that at the time he couldn't understand where all the creatures went, as, he claims, the craft was only about 14 foot long. Hall also states that hundreds of people must have seen the UFO as it sped into the sky. Later that evening he would tell his parents about his experience, but they did not believe him. Unfortunately, this was not the end of Hall's experiences. Around 3 days later, Hall claims that while going to the shop, a grey came after him up the back lane. Hall states that he ran as fast as he could, but the creature was on top of him in a flash. He screamed, and luckily for him, his uncle Ernie appeared and smashed it over the head with a shovel. Ernie sent Hall to fetch the police. A local police officer, Sergeant Brooks, followed Hall and was taken aback when he saw the creature. Ernie and Brooks covered the creature with a coal sack and pulled it into a back coal yard. Hall reported that the body was taken away 20 minutes later so that authorities could be informed. He claims that the place they hid the body was under St. Cuthbert's Church on Bensham Road, where it was stored for 3 months. The church does in fact have an underground area. A further claim from Hall was that the next day, there were men in white overalls with little cases all around Headley Street. They pulled everyone out of their houses along Saltwell Road. Hall states they were looking for the other creatures. Professors and scientists from Edinburgh, investigators from London came into Hall's house. Hall would further recall that on the morning of his abduction, he saw an extremely bright light zigzagging across the sky. This was also spotted by some Australian soldiers. Hall also recalls that he witnessed a woman holding a baby coming out of the craft shortly after he had been let out. Hall claims to have been ill for a few days following the abduction, and for 2 days his eyes watered, and he suffered from headaches. The small triangular-shaped mark that appeared on his left cheek, which remained until he was 13. After the event, Hall claims to have been intimidated and threatened by officials, warning that he would be killed if he said anything about what had happened. He also states that he was interviewed by a high-ranking Royal Air Force officer. It should be noted that Vernon Brooks, son of Sergeant Brooks, has stated that his father never mentioned the event and can't recall anyone talking about it at the time or since. In addition, Ada Waugh, whose parents owned the local shop right next to where the craft landed, has stated that she doesn't recall anything from the time nor hearing anyone talking about it. Hall states that he called a local nighttime radio talk show called Night Owls with Alan Robson, and that a number of people had confirmed some of the details he had mentioned. Unfortunately, there are no archives from this actual show. However, host Alan Robson has confirmed that people did call in that night to confirm some of the details given by Hall on the night. There is no press evidence to support the claim. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our double presentation on the mysterious case of the South Shields poltergeist and the Gateshead Grey incident. Have you experienced poltergeist or other paranormal phenomenon? Have you seen a UFO, or any of the creatures encountered by Richard Hall? Have you an abduction story to share? Please let us know in the comments. As ever, please hit the like button and share this case file, and if you would like to be notified as we release new cases, please subscribe to our channel. Remember, all realities are possible, but ours are mysterious realities.